Welcome to the Friends of Dan Music Podcast. I'm Dan Miles. You've been listening to the music of Olivia Dabo. That was from a CD she released in 2007 called Not TV. Though she's primarily known as an actress, she's also a very talented singer-songwriter. Of the 10 tracks on the album, she wrote 6 by herself and co-wrote the other 4. In addition to her own solo work, she has also recorded with Julian Lennon, John Bon Jovi, and Seal. I've really been looking forward to speaking with her, so let's get her on the line. Joining me on the phone from Los Angeles, California, is Olivia Dabo. Welcome.
Hi, Dan.
We just heard a song called Wide Open Spaces from your Not TV album. Before we start talking about the specific tracks, could you explain the significance of that album title?
Well, I think it's something that's, slightly comedic. I think people predominantly know me from television because I've done a lot of it, and I think so. Those are sort of like no pun intended, guys, but it's not a TV show. and then within that metaphor, aligned with my album and also kind of aligned with the video that I did for Revolution, we used the emblem of a television. And I think, to me, I grew up with television, as did most people, and I just think it leaves a lot to the imagination, and I think this album in particular, this Not TV album, is, there's a lot of visuals that come to mind when you listen to the lyrics and, the orchestrations and the melodies. So it's connected somehow, I think, just to the great big world of television. And there's something sort of nostalgic about it that I think it reminds me of certain television shows. One of which I was on as a teenager. So I don't know. It was just sort of something thematically that was in the air.
Nice. And one thing I was struck by upon first listening to this album is how well you harmonize with yourself. And it's not always the same. You mix it up, you create different effects and dynamics, and that's not always easy to do.
No, I got that from my father, funnily enough. He was a great, he writes amazing melodies, Luckily, I come from a great musical pedigree, and as a little girl, I used to just listen to him sing and write these incredible melodies. But I mean, as soon as he could kind of get off the actual melody and go straight to a harmony, he would. So I think that very much came from him, including just singing along with the melody. It's something that, the likes of Frank Sinatra and Ella Fitzgerald, a lot of these kind of household names that were played in my household growing up. It's just something that I think I picked up on and got quite good at. So yeah, I think that's kind of where that came from.
And I'll edify the listeners who don't know, your father's Mike Dabo from Manfred Mann, writer of the song Handbags and Glad Rags, which is famously used by Ricky Gervais as the theme for The Office.
That's right, as well as Build Me Up Buttercup, which was sung by the Foundations. And I think it's to date one of the most famous wedding songs played at people's weddings. It's amazing with music, with publishing. If you write a great song, it gets to kind of get played over and over again and get exposed to all these different generations. So that's something that is so wonderful about music, especially if you're a songwriter.
I was familiar with the Rod Stewart version of it. And honestly, when I saw, my brother told me I should watch the show The Office, and as soon as I heard the theme song, I said, please tell me that Mike Dabo has his own publishing on that.
He does, and incidentally, that song being linked to The Office, there was a whole big comeback of that song, and I think getting back to nostalgic music, it's actually quite an English patriotic song. It's known as one of the saddest English songs ever written.
Right.
So, because you're talking about, the working class in England, and your grandfather having to sweat and work really hard for so his granddaughter can buy new clothes and this, that, and the other. So it's really talking about English lineage and how that cycle works, and every lineage really. It doesn't just speak independently to England, but I think that I've only just realized just from recent interviews with my dad and stuff with that song that that English people are quite proud of it.
Well, as much as I appreciate and admire him, returning to you, another thing about Not TV, the production on that album is very interesting, particularly in terms of the instrumentation choices. As we're about to hear, many of the musical beds have an eclectic quality, and as you said, a nostalgic quality on occasion that I find very appealing. But I also want to point out that the production is really just the icing on the cake, because I'm sure this material was equally compelling just in demo form. I mean, the melodies and chords and everything is there. So it's just kind of, you dress it up and it make it interesting. But I'd be interested in just hearing demos of these songs. I'm sure those were great too.
Thank you, Dan. I really, I concur completely with you on that. Actually, I've just been recently listening to some of the earlier demo versions of the album, and in some, I always prefer demos to things that are ultimately finished. I never like anything too finished. However, sometimes a certain song requires that, and the bar just needs to go, it has to become epic to some kind of degree. But, obviously I love artists like Neil Young and Joni Mitchell and Imogen Heap, and, artists who, there's just something a little tattered and torn about it, and it's not perfect, and I think that's kind of where music is going today. In fact, a lot of the music that I've been doing recently is a lot more like listening to a demo, and I think just there's a dire need for that. I think people kind of identify with it more because that's just kind of where we are. But you're absolutely right. And the instrumentation and, Patrick Leonard is a huge component of that. He really taught me a lot with this album in terms of orchestration and, where to use certain instruments to kind of enhance a melody, where you can just kind of, take the instrumentation out and just let the vocal really soar. And if the vocal's strong enough, it can carry a song. So, it's really about choices with music. I mean, as a songwriter, if you write something on a guitar or a piano for me has always been more melodic as a songwriter. And obviously I'm a better pianist anyway, so I may be biased about that particular thing. But, guitar, you have a lot more space for melody, and you can kind of, it ends up sounding a little bit more folky, and you can hear it kind of more with a band. But yeah, both piano and guitar I used both those instruments to write all these songs, and so they kind of came out very acoustic. And I think the great litmus test to a great song is that you can just play it on a guitar or a piano, and it's just there, and it just works. And you always want to think about that when you play out live too. Is if it doesn't stand on its own on a piano and a guitar, it's probably not going to work so well live.
Right. yeah. I completely agree with that. If there's so many bells, in other words, it's not just a matter of too many bells and whistles; it's a matter of all bells and whistles, no substance beneath.
Exactly.
Well, of course, the focal point of the album are all of your lead vocals, and Wide Open Spaces is a great example of that. What inspired you to write that song?
Well, it's interesting. I love jazz, and I love the freedom of what you can do vocally with jazz. I also love classic rock. I also love, I love beats and I love Portishead and Massive Attack. Some of these early '90s groups, and Brit rock and funk and folk, and what always kind of inspires me to write music is a feeling that I have that is sort of living inside me. A lot of my melodies are kind of jazz orientated. They come from a kind of a very free place of, a rhapsodical place, or let's say a place in my mid-heaven, which I live in a lot, which is also, I think, part of my star sign, because I'm an Aquarian. So it's kind of, one obviously has to have one's feet on the ground, but whenever I can take a chance and just kind of glide up in the clouds, which is more of a jazzy place to be, that's where my melodies come. And usually my musical muses come down in the evening, sort of sometime after 1, because I'm a fairly nocturnal person. So Wide Open Spaces is the album overall is fairly introspective. it's about joy, it's about melancholia, it's about looking back but having hope into the future. And Wide Open Spaces, for me, the lyrics are, once we were children in wide open spaces, would you come back for me? I had this visual of just being a child with my brother, on the beach. And it's about that yearning to go back to that place of innocence where you don't have to think about tomorrow. You're just present where you are. You feel the sand on your feet. It's very sensorily inspired with the sun and the wind and, those things that you remember, the smell, all your senses being really awakened, which you remember as children, like in the summer when you go to camp and you smell, wood, from the trees in the forest, or, you're in your sleeping bag, or you smell marshmallows and Hershey's, s'mores. You're making s'mores. Is that what they're called, I think?
S'mores, yeah.
Yeah, those things that take you back to that time where you just kind of didn't have a care in the world. And I think there's that yearning in all of us that every once in a while when life has you have the weight of the world on your shoulders, there's something very peaceful and lovely about that thought. So that's kind of what inspired me to write that song.
Well, what I find interesting about that is you're talking about a childlike state of mind, but we mentioned you have a jazzy inflection to your vocal, and then the ambience of that electric piano and the rim shot type groove is kind of like an adult musical style, but it does flash back to innocent. In other words, the music is not childlike; the music is very adult, but the open feeling of it is interesting contrast.
Yeah, the jazziness. Not that I want to compare myself to Steely Dan, because I don't think I could. I don't think anybody could. I mean, they're just they're an anomaly musically. I think there's so many people. I mean, still are. I think they're playing in Coachella this year, which is awesome. I have to be there for that. But because of Patrick Leonard and some of these incredibly seasoned musicians, Wendy Melvoin and Richie Sambora, who played guitar on this particular track that you just heard. Brian McLeod was playing those kind of dope drums that you were talking about, and Paul Bushnell and Justin Clayton. I mean, I could go on and on about the musicianship, and of course Patrick Leonard. I mean, we were able to create kind of that kind of vibe where it's almost like a 70s. It just got that energy of a bunch of musicians getting in a room and creating freelance music that's just, you can just tap your feet to it and everybody's on their game playing their instruments. And I, wrote this song with this melody and was able to just be even more inspired with these people in the room to sing it. Mm-hmm. So I think that's a really great example of great musicianship and the chemistry of the right people involved and the right song, and everybody kind of really loving what they're playing, because it has sort of a happy-go-lucky feel to it.
Lyrically, I like the line about feet being soiled and cut by smoke and mirrors.
You like that one, huh?
Nice turn of phrase, yeah.
Yeah. I tend to do that lyrically. Sometimes I invert things, and I don't really know where they come from. I like the lyrics at the end of the song where it says, dance like there's nobody watching, I just want to feel the earth. I mean, that's very much sort of my whole outlook on that song is about being free, being back in that state of mind, that childlike state of mind, which is really, I think, when we get to the end of our life and look at things in retrospect, I think we probably, people say your life will flash in front of you. I mean, who knows? I'm sure everybody's is different and individual, but if that should happen, I think hopefully we get a glimpse of those really rare moments that really only last about 10 years prior to, those prepubescent moments,
Well, I grew up in a military family, and we moved every 2 or 3 years, so there are certain songs that I associate with a certain place and a certain age, and my childhood is very specific. I was in England, then I was in Germany, then my dad went to Vietnam, and I was in California, then we were in West Point. So, I know the first time I heard all these, and what I find is if I grab a song, and I know I first heard it in 1968 when I was 5 years old, if I listen to that and close my eyes, I can almost remember being that kid, and it makes me remember other things.
Yes, Absolutely, because your mind has the ability to expand because it's in that state of relaxation, which is where we should be. By the way, I think more than not. But that's one of the great things about music, is you put something on and it has the ability to change your life, literally.
Yeah.
It's a universal language, you don't have to even understand the lyrics. It's the chords and it's the way, it's how provocative the words come out of the person's mouth who's singing it, and how they're connecting all the dots. It's just a human connection that you feel. Mm-hmm. And so, I'm so honored to be making it, meaning music.
Let's dive into another song. This one has a nice funky rhythm and another jazzy melody with some pretty daring interval jumps, which you handle.
I love the way you're describing it, interval jumps.
Which you handle quite deftly. I wouldn't try and sing a melody like that, but you do it well. I've known a lot of people in my life who are never pleased, but in my experience, they're usually at least 3/4 mad. So
yes.
how did you come to write Half Mad and Never Pleased?
Gosh, I think there's some very interesting, speaking about inverting lyrics and the thing that I kind of tend to do, there's some interesting ones in that song. There's a lot of goddess energy in that song and, really exposing the depth of one's womanhood, which is bounteous and it's a deep well, and it's a great thing to really explore. I think I mentioned the word testament goddess in the song. Half mad and never pleased, I think that creative people are considered mad, and I don't know, I wouldn't necessarily categorize madness as, a bad thing. I think it's, again, going back to that state of consciousness where you would just allow what anybody thinks to not affect who you are. Because if you are really going to be free, then you really have to not give a shit what anybody thinks. So I think that this song in particular was just an opportunity for me to just kind of let all my stream of consciousness of what I think as a wire out and kind of own it.
Well, there's a lot of interesting contrast in the lyrics. Give me razor blades and ice cream.
Yeah.
And, and I made a note of a dark, vengeful Old Testament goddess with a certain kind of sweetness. So there again...
Half mad and never pleased, well, at least you could be earnest. It's also... There's a little bit of retribution, I think, in that song. I wasn't thinking of anybody in particular, but, sometimes I write, I think, if I talk about some of the great people that I look up to in terms of a great narrative voice, I think of Leonard Cohen and Roger Waters and Bob Dylan. When you think about their narrative voice, they're not necessarily, I've been influenced, I've tried to attempt to write songs from that place, or even Kate Bush. I think there's, Annie Lennox, Joni Mitchell again. I think there's a lot of female, songwriters who come from a female narrative voice, and I don't think it's always from their personal experience. Sometimes it's just going to that place in your mind where there's something else that comes through. Maybe it's your higher self, or your, it's just another channel that's coming through, and it's kind of exposing itself, and then you just kind of take it and do what you do with it. And I've definitely played around with the vocals on that song. That's just sort of what happened when I got in front of the mic.
Well, it's cool. And, you mentioned Roger Waters. I think if you listen to The Wall, I think you could definitely put the tag half mad and never pleased on pretty much every character in that thing.
But I think that Pink Floyd was generated from being half mad and never pleased. I think English, the fundamental aspects of English history, they're always complaining about something, because you've got the class system there, and you've got, the Northerners, and you've got the hoity-toity, toffee, the terribly well-to-do English and statesmen, and the working class is always the most important. That's what makes the country what it is. So I think they're the ones with the narrative voice, and that's what Pink Floyd I think is. I think you had Sid Barrett, I mean, he, unfortunately, bless his soul, I mean, he was a pivotal part of that band happening, and had he not been quite as mad as he was, who even knows if the direction of the band would have gone the way it did. I think they very much held on and honored his vision.
They certainly referred to him in a lot of lyrics after he was gone.
They did, yeah. He was very beloved, and he still is.
Well, I think you explained all that very articulately with your words, but now let's let the listeners hear how you express this in your music. From her Not TV album, here's Olivia Dabo with Half Mad and Never Pleased.
Like the way you forgot in a dream, but you know it's always there. I'm like a monster and a little kid. Give me razor blades and ice cream. So you can put the blame on me, 'cause I'm easier to see. There's nothing you can offer me that I need, and I like you, but I don't want you now. I've tumbled into distant twilight, watch 1,000 pictures being burned. I dance into the purple fire, but I crumble at the thought of losing you. I'm not some cafe on your daddy's vineyard outside Cape Town in the rain. I'm not some shiftless subcontractor who didn't deliver you your pay. You say I'm a dark, vengeful testament goddess with certain kind of sweetness. Half mad and never pleased, well at least you could be honest. But it was plain to see you disappear in front of me. I tumble into distant twilight, watch 1,000 pictures being burned. I dance into the purple fire, but I crumble at the thought of losing you. First you're not good enough for him, then you're too good for him. But both things have to be there or you've got nothing. First you're not good enough for him, then you're too good for him. Both things have to be there or you've got nothing.